G'day, so we've got a different kind of video today. We're in the office today. What we're having a look at today, this is a bit of a long-standing issue that I and a number of people have had for a very long time now. Over the last few years especially, there's been increasing scrutiny over claims made by automotive manufacturers in Australia who make assertions about the towing capacities of their vehicles. Specifically regarding vehicles that are rated to say 3.5 tonne tow rating, and when you actually deduct 3.5 tonnes on the tow bar of that particular vehicle and take it off the curb weight of the car, there's so little residual left over that practically once you put a driver in it, they've fitted some accessories to the car, or they've got the family on board, it just can't be done. It can't be done in the real world. And I've been extraordinarily frustrated by this for a long period of time, especially watching a number of commentators online and in print come out and critique automotive manufacturers and reviewers who continually promote the fictitious claims. And look, when I say fictitious, they can actually be implemented, but not in real world conditions. The towing rating of these particular vehicles, the 3.5 tonne tow rating and such, they can be done, but not in real world conditions. And this continues on after years of critique, and it is unacceptable and it needs to stop. The latest thing that I've seen done in this space is a couple of reviews on the Ram 1500 Ecodiesel. So this is the next Ram vehicle in the 1500 series. It's been imported and complied by ASV and are now on the domestic market for sale. And that's been released in Laramie only spec. And what I'm talking about in that is we're getting some very good reviews of this particular vehicle, the 1500 Ecodiesel Laramie, and making a lot of claims about its brilliant towing ability. And we have to have a look at that in a number of ways that apparently these reviewers are not, which is misleading the public who are reading these articles and using these articles to formulate an opinion on whether they should buy the car or not. And this needs to change. And it's not just relating to the Ram series of vehicles. There are many, many makes of vehicles that all need to take a really good hard look at themselves, and there needs to be some changes in what the requirements of automotive manufacturers in Australia, how they market their vehicle to the public, and in no small measure, the critics, the people reviewing these cars, they need to be called to task on it as well, in that they need to do a better job in critiquing how a vehicle is actually able to carry out its manufacturer's claims in the real world. So let's have a look at the Ram 1500 Ecodiesel in Laramie spec. So this particular vehicle, it has a 2715 curb weight, 2.715 tonnes. It has a towing capacity claimed of 3.5 tonnes and has a gross combined mass, so that's the weight, the maximum weight of the vehicle and the trailer together, noting that the trailer can't exceed 3.5 tonnes. The maximum amount though they can weigh as a whole, combined mass, and that leaves a residual of 477 kilos. And that's, to be fair to Ram, that's actually pretty good. When you have a look at some of the other vehicles on the domestic market, such as like the Colorado or the D-Max, or you know, the Triton or the Hilux or whatever, there's not much residual when those vehicles, when you max them out to if they make a claim on a 3.5 tonne tow rating. Admittedly, the automatic Hilux and the Triton series does not make that claim, but there's not much residual left over. In the ones that claim 3.5 tonnes, which also include like the Ranger and the BT50, there's not much residual left over after those vehicles have the 3.5 tonnes taken off. So 477 kilos is actually not bad. Now, my problem with it though is 477 kilos is probably still not a great deal, really, when you consider that the curb weight, that's how it's coming out of the factory. There's no accessories fitted to it, and there's no family on board. Now, and admittedly, the curb weight is a bit rubbery, and that's just as a side note to this. If you're having a look at a vehicle and you're considering what the curb weight is, you really need to know what the curb weight includes. Some vehicles will specify that it includes a full tank of fuel, it includes a tow bar, and it includes a passenger sometimes. Usually the tank of fuel and however it comes. In the Ram's case, it does come with a factory tow bar, so we assume that the curb weight would include the factory tow bar, or it certainly should. And let's say it includes a full tank of fuel. But if you're going to put people in this, let's say it's got 5 seats, so let's assume you're taking a family of 5 away. Let's say mum and dad weigh, I don't know, let's say they weigh, just for round numbers, 150 kilos between the two of them. And let's say you've got 3 kids totaling 75 kilos. It'll depend on what age they are, obviously. But let's just say that for ease of numbers. So that's going to take off 225 and you're going to have 250 left over. And then what accessories have you fitted? Have you fitted the bull bar? Have you fitted brush bars? Have you fitted a tonneau or a canopy? Like if you fitted a canopy and a bull bar, what you have left in here is gone. Like that's gone. You're not going to have anything. You're not going to have anything left, and you've still got to put luggage on board. Do you want to carry some tools or a toolbox? Do you want to carry a fridge? You know, what else do you want? If you're going to max this out 3.5 tons, and you've got a family, if you don't have a family, you'll save your 75 kilos. But if you're going to still, you know, driving lights, bull bar, maybe you want to whack on 3.5 tons, so you might want to put airbags under the back end or beef up your suspension a little bit. It's not going to take long to eat through this. And this is my problem, that you can test it in isolation, but isolation, how that comes from factory, have a look at how many utes out there are towing loads and caravans just in factory configuration. Basically none. They've almost all got a bull bar, and if they don't have a canopy, they've got a tonneau cover. A tonneau cover weighs a lot less than a canopy, admittedly. But you're going to churn through this pretty fast. So in the real world, are you actually going to be able to pull 3.5 tons? And this asks a question for me as a potential purchaser. When I compare it to something like an Australian spec ute, and you know, like one of the utes been on the market for a while, and I'm not advocating for them. I'm not a big Volkswagen fan, generally, my personal opinion. You guys make up your own mind. But the V6 Amarok has an engine comparable to the V6 Laramie because it's a 3-litre 6 and it's diesel. And it has more power, actually, the Amarok, than the 1500 at peak, claimed from Volkswagen anyway. If you buy that in ultimate spec, which is the top of the line, and this is the top of the line, you've got 256 kilos left over. And admittedly, that's 200 kilos less than the 1500 Ecodiesel. If you buy it in core, so you're not going to take the top of the line model, you've got 340 kilos left over. So 340 kilos left over, that's going to be, you know, 130 kilos less than up here. But the thing is, $110,000 plus on-road costs. And at the moment, you can get one of these, you can buy a core for 50,000 drive away, or you can get an ultimate for circa 60 grand drive away. Here, you're going to be 120 or more drive away based on the sticker price. So you're half or less than half down here, and admittedly, 477 kilos left over, or 256 for the ultimate, or 340 for the core. What's the 200 kilos worth to you? Is the 200 kilos worth all that additional money? Admittedly, this is a bigger car and has rear airbags where this doesn't, which is one of the reasons I'm not a massive advocate of the Amarok. But this has curtain airbags. You know, it's probably it's finished very well. I think the Ultimate is actually finished very well. The interior is a very pleasant place to be in an Ultimate Amarok. A friend of mine's got one. But is it worth paying 2 of these for one of these? The tub is is bigger, but not actually massive. The tub on the Amarok is pretty big. It's pretty big, and this isn't as big as I thought it would be, to be honest. But in any event, this is a bigger vehicle and it has a bigger cabin. Although the Amarok, in my opinion, has probably the biggest and most comfortable interiors of the current generation utes in Australia, excluding the US trucks. But is it worth all that money? And you've got to consider that into your buying. And the reason is, in my opinion, is because this is compromised. 477 kilos residual, you're going to be compromised over time. If you're going to pull 3.5 tons over the life of the vehicle, it's something you're going to do regularly with a van, or you're going to pull a race car or something, and you need to be able to pull 3.5 tons. I believe that you're going to compromise here, either on passengers or additional things you can put in the tub, whether, as I said, it might be luggage or a fridge or toolbox or whatever else you're taking away with you. You're going to have to compromise. You're going to be on the limit here, and you're going to have to compromise down here as well. Now, admittedly, there's less of a compromise here, but is the compromise worth paying double for? Because if you're compromising here and you're compromising there, what I would say is you either need a bigger vehicle with a higher tow rating, so maybe you need to go to a 1/2 ton truck as opposed to a 3/4 ton truck as opposed to a 1/2 ton truck. So go to a bigger one that gives you more capacity, or you have to pull a lower total rolling weight on your trailer. Maybe you need to back it down to 3 tons or 2.5, and that's the maximum that you can pull. So you're going to have to compromise here, you're going to have to compromise here. Now, in the reviews that have been done, especially one done just very, very recently, which sparked this video, done by Car Advice, they gave the Ram 1500 Ecodiesel 8.1 out of 10, which is a very, very good rating. That's actually a very good rating. That would be firmly in the recommend camp. And at 110,000, 3.5 ton tow rating, and one of the principal good points, at the top of the review, they have the good points and the bad points, and they have the bad points, good points. In the good points, one of the things that they recommend, one of the things they say, which is a reason to buy the vehicle, is the great towing ability. The great towing ability. And if you read the review, there is no mention of them hooking up a caravan or a load or of any sort to the vehicle and towing it. So how do you make the recommendation of a great towing ability if you haven't actually towed with the vehicle yet? So there's that. And then there's another review that was done just before that by another online publication. And they reviewed this and they did a towing review. So I went, okay, well, maybe that'll give us some better advice on how the reviewers are actually looking at the towing ability of this vehicle. And maybe that will cut to some of this issue about how much residual weight you have after you put 3.5 ton on the ball. But the review, what they did is they got the Ram, they did a big loop, and part of it they did towing. So they went and got a caravan. And what caravan, on a vehicle that you're looking to assess the towing ability of a vehicle that is rated to pull 3.5 tons, what sort of weight do you think they put behind it? They put 2 tons behind it. And why did they put 2 tons behind it? They put 2 tons behind it because they said that 2 tons most accurately reflects what most people pull. Now, I completely disagree with that. And the reason I completely disagree with that is not because on average most people pull a 2-ton van. That statement may well be correct. But if you're buying this at $110,000, I don't believe, based on the interaction I've had with Ram owners and reading social media commentary in various online Ram groups in Australia, the people that are buying this truck are not buying it to go and pull around a dinghy. They're buying it to pull a heavy load. They're buying a big truck, an expensive truck to pull, and potentially as equally expensive caravan or race car or something behind it at a very high load. So 2 tons on this vehicle is an unacceptable test. And also, just objectively, even if their statement is true that most people that own a Ram 1500 Ecodiesel are only going to pull 2 tons. Let's say that statement is true. How can you assess a vehicle's stated claim that it can pull 3.5 tons if you're only going to put 2 tons behind it? Pulling 3.5 tons or even 3 tons is a vastly different proposition than pulling 2 tons. If for no other reason that you're going to be pulling a load behind a vehicle that is heavier than the vehicle itself. So you might want to test that out, in my opinion. So they pulled 2 tons. And then they say it's got great towing ability. And again, how can you say that a vehicle has a great towing ability by testing a vehicle rated for 3.5 tons with a tow weight of 2 tons? You can't do it. It can't be done. And that becomes critical when you have a look at, and I've spoken to people who own Ram 1500s, more so in the petrol Hemi version, but also one person who has a 1500. And the majority seems to be that once you exceed 3 tons with a Ram 1500, you need to beef up that rear suspension. The rear suspension is inadequate to pull anything across time and distance and different circumstances when you're pulling north of 3 tons. It sags in the back end, the nose goes up. Indeed, I've seen a chap trying to put 3.5 tons behind his Ram in a nicely balanced trailer load, and the back end was way down. He said, I'm going to have to do something about this because this is on its limits. And indeed, I don't expect the 1500 Ecodiesel to be greatly different from the petrol versions, because the rear axle loading on the Ecodiesel and the Express for 4.5 tons and the Laramie for 4.5 tons all is at 1.77 tons. So I assume, I may be wrong, but I assume that the rear axle configuration on all the Ram vehicles is the same. And indeed, Ram Australia has commented saying that the difference between the 4.5 ton tow rating Express and Laramie versions with the Hemi V8 and the difference between 3.5 ton version and the 4.5 ton version is the diff ratios. You have a higher diff ratio with the ones rated to pull 4.5 tons. Anyway, point is that people read these reviews to determine whether they should buy a car or whether they should not. They're relying on the advice of the journalist to help make their decision. And if the journalist says they have this great towing ability, they read it's got a 3.5 ton tow rating and it has great towing ability. What most people would reasonably expect is that that vehicle has a great capacity to tow 3.5 tons, but the test doesn't bear that out. And in the car advice review, it doesn't even mention that they tested the tow rating. They just assume that it's got great towing ability. And this becomes a real problem. This isn't as bad as what some of the current generation utes are, because you've still got 477 kilos of capacity here. But where it becomes egregiously bad is in some of the other makes, and in Ram themselves when they make a 4.5 ton tow rating claim in the Express and the Laramie, which is just a completely fictitious claim in the real world. Can it be done? Yes, it can be done. It could be done. But boy, oh boy, is it hard to do. And I'll tell you why. If you buy a Ram 1500 Laramie with a 4.5 ton tow rating configuration, it has a curb weight of 2650. It has a total tow rating of 4.5 tons with a GCM of 7.237 tons. That gives you a residual load that you can put in the vehicle of 87 kilograms. So if you're a driver and you weigh more than 87 kilos, you're bang out of luck. You can't even get in the car to drive it after you've put 4.5 tons on the ball. If you weigh 90, sorry mate, you better go away, lose 3 kilos. And even when you get back into the car, you better not have too much additional weight on you, or take a drink bottle or your lunchbox, because you're going to be over the limit. That is unacceptable. That is unacceptable. That shouldn't be allowed. That vehicle should not be allowed to be marketed like that, because people will buy that car and it is marketed as having a 4.5 ton tow rating, and there's only 87 kilos of residual weight. That vehicle can't pull 4.5 tons across different circumstances over the life of that vehicle. And I've been in Ram dealerships, and because I looked extraordinarily hard at the 1500. I really, really wanted one. Ultimately, I didn't buy one, and that's another video that I've done as to the reasons why I didn't buy one. But I've been in Ram dealerships and multiple, and they said, what do you want it for? And I said, well, I'm a farmer, I do da-da-da-da-da, I want four-wheel drive and da-da-da, and I want to be able to pull 4.5 tons. And all of the dealers that I've spoken to said, oh, mate, well, this is what you want, 4.5 tons. You want a 1500. You want an Express or a Laramie, mate, because those other ones, they won't do it. They'll only do 3.5. But these, 4.5 tons, no worries. In fact, one of the dealers I actually critiqued on it, and I said, well, hang on a minute, can you actually do this? You know, once you factor curb weight, the 4.5 ton load on the ball, and passengers and cargo and accessories, is there going to be enough room? He's like, yeah, no problem, that's fine, yeah. And it can't be done on the Express. The Express sheds some weight over the Laramie because it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that the Laramie does. The Express only has 132 kilos residual. Again, it can't be done. For most people, themselves and their partner getting in that car will blow the 4.5 ton out of the water. If they've fitted a bull bar, if they've fitted the canopy, if they've fitted, brush bars or heavier side steps, or as I said, the feedback seems to be you need to beef up the suspension. Have you put a weight distribution hitch on it? Have you put airbags on it? Have you beefed up the suspension in another way? What have you done to the vehicle to help it pull that 4.5 tons? All of that is going to prevent you. It's going to work against you in being able to pull 4.5 tons. It just can't be done. And this needs to be addressed because again and again, I see people that enthusiastically will buy, a Ford Ranger and they think, I've got my Ford Ranger, I've just got my 3.5 ton van, I'm going towing. And you go, oh man, not again. Or you'll get one of these, we get a comment on it, oh, I've just got this, I need my 4.5 tons, mate. Got my 4.5 tons to load on it. Got my 70 mil ball, loaded her up, 4.5 tons down the road, pulls it, no worries at all. Well, regardless of whether it pulls it no worries at all or not, you're over the limit. And it's unsafe and it's illegal. And it puts you in a real precarious position. Because if you have an accident, not only will your insurance likely not pay out, but you may end up in the position where there was a public case on this not very long ago, where someone was overloaded in their vehicle, they had an accident, and tragically there was a fatality, and they ended up in court because they were driving a vehicle that was overloaded and therefore illegal and unsafe. And this is what is being perpetuated with car reviews that are not giving the full picture. Now, this isn't new. None of this sort of critique is new. There's been a number of independent people, journalists, who have gone out and said, look, vehicles aren't actually able, in many cases, to tow what they say they're capable of doing. And yet the reviews keep coming out saying great towing ability, no asterisk, no further comment that, look, you might want to be careful about this. And that needs to change. These sorts of discussions have been happening for years. They've been happening for at least the last 2 years. People have been increasingly critiquing modern vehicle specification, and yet it continues to go on, and a large proportion, maybe not the majority, but a large proportion of people are still, confused and deceived by these misleading specifications. And this has to stop. It has to stop because it's putting lives at risk, and it may not even be you who might be towing something in complete compliance with what your vehicle is able to do. It may not be you. It might be the person coming the other way who suddenly gets the death wobbles, veers in onto the wrong side of the road at the last minute, and you have a head-on collision. It's just putting people at risk, and this continues to happen. I get that certain publications and car advice may just really, really like a particular car. They may like the Ram. In fact, one of the reviewers, one of the journalists at Car Advice, said that the Ram was one of his favourite cars of last year. And that's fine if you're particularly taken with the Ram 1500, but to say that it has a great towing ability without detailing any of this so people can actually understand what great towing ability looks like, without them being able to understand what the real world capability of a vehicle is, that is unacceptable, and that has to change. Now, to give you a bit of a example of something on the other side of this, I do have an example of something that gives you a better specification. Now, firstly, it's the 79 Series Land Cruiser. Now, I'm not advocating for the 79 Series Land Cruiser particularly. I know some people like it. It has its fans, and a lot of people, are very, very pleased that it still exists, and it's a utilitarian and very basic and rugged vehicle, and that's all fine. That's all fine. Personally, I think it's egregious that that vehicle still costs $80,000, considering the extraordinary lack of engineering development that has been invested in that vehicle over time. And the best example of that is the Land Cruiser 79 series. As capable a vehicle as it is, and as good a vehicle it may be for a lot of different Australians, its lack of development is that we're in 2020 and that car costs $80,000. It's in the dual cab configuration. It has 5 seats and it has a two-speaker stereo. A two-speaker stereo. And it has 1 cup holder. But to make up the value proposition, it has 5 ashtrays. Like, my goodness, to show you the lack of development is that they've kept the ashtrays in, more cup holders, a better speaker stereo. No, I want to keep those ashtrays in. Just shows you the lack of development in that car. But in any event, I do understand that it has its fans, and that's fine. But the 79 Series Land Cruiser is interesting because it has a 2.175 tonne curb weight. There's a 3.5 tonne tow rating and a 6.8 tonne GCM. That means it has a 1.125 tonne residual available weight that you can put it. That's what tear you can actually get into it, and people and other things. Now, admittedly, the 79 Series Cruiser comes with no tray. It comes cab chassis, so you are going to eat into that with, a tray. And you can fit a light tray if you want to maximise your carrying ability. Stick an aluminium one on there if you want, or you can put a heavier one on there if you want to put a steel tray. You can put a mild steel one on there. You can put a heavy steel one on. Just depends on how much residual weight you want to keep up your sleeve in it. But it's 1.125, and let's say, just for ease of maths, and you put a light tray on it, takes out 225 kilos of that, or 250 kilos of it. It's going to bring you back to circa 900 kilos, or even if it was a bit more than that, it might take you back to, say, 850. You're going to have 850 kilos of residual weight that you can put in that car, which means you can blow, you can bull bar on it, brush bars and side steps. You put a heavier tow bar on, or a weight distribution hitch, and you're still going to have 500 kilos left over, which is going to be more than enough to get, say, 250 kilos of people in it if you wanted to fill all the seats. And then you got 250 kilos for your luggage and your tools or your fridge or whatever. Now, for some people, that's going to be insufficient. Admittedly, there's plenty of people who look to do GVM upgrades on 79 Series Cruiser and eat into their tow rating to try and get more on board the car, and that's fine because it's horses for courses. But having said that, considering, and this comes from my personal experience and yours may be different, in speaking to people who are making a relatively new shift into owning, let's say, a utility type vehicle and then using it for towing, the general expectation is that the dealer tells them, this has got a 3.5 tonne tow rating, or it's got a 4.5 tonne tow rating, mate. This is what, go hook up your 3.5 tonne van and go. And I've had that specific advice from multiple dealers across multiple brands. Anyway, it seems to be that a lot of the time with people who are new to using utility vehicles is that the expectation is that if they've got a vehicle that can tow 3.5 tonnes, that they can put 3.5 tonnes on the ball, and they've still got this big empty tray on the back that they can also chuck stuff in there as well, and then they can head off and everything's going to be sweet. And I'm not palming off personal responsibility. Everybody should be responsible to make sure that their vehicles are compliant with road rules. That should go without saying. But in any event, that seems to be a reasonable expectation from people, that it's got a tray, I should be able to fill that and put on the tow bar what the dealer tells me that I can put on it. Now, I personally say, when you buy a car, go chuck it on a weighbridge and find out what your curb weight is and start rechecking as you accessorize your vehicle so you know how much weight you've got to deal with. That's just good practice. But in any event, there's so many people that, don't actually understand all this or haven't looked into it themselves, and they're driving down the highway continually overweight. And it puts people at risk. And at least specifying vehicles, making the specs of vehicles in this format, where they actually have some capacity, is far safer than this. Surely we can agree on that. And in my opinion, there needs to be some regulation around this, in that a manufacturer, an importer, should be able to demonstrate that their tow ratings can actually be carried out with a reasonable expectation of what things would look like in the real world. Towing caravans or trailers or whatever is increasingly popular. You just drive down the Hume Freeway on any given day and you'll see an endless procession of cars pulling heavy loads, utes pulling heavy loads. And this needs to be brought back into line so that people have an understanding of what they can do. Or at the very least, it needs to become part of packages from dealers that people who are buying cars understand exactly how much residual weight they have. And when comparing vehicles, this needs to be factored in as well. And especially when you're factoring a car that's worth $110,000 and yet only has 477 kilos residual weight after you put a trailer on, surely that would be worthwhile telling your readers that, especially as it relates to other vehicles that might be in a slightly different class. And I would think that it is reasonable that most of the crop of utilities sold on the Australian domestic market are in a different class to a Ram 1500. But when the specifications overlap and capacity overlaps, surely there should be a reasonable expectation of the public that those things be compared so they can say, well, is it worth making the jump from a $50,000, $60,000 vehicle to $110,000, $120,000 on the road vehicle? Surely that would be a reasonable expectation. This is unacceptable that this sort of nonsense continues and people are continually being sold into vehicles and advised into vehicles that aren't able to do what people are pitching them to do. And it needs to change. Thank you for watching.